Most people chase money the way a crowd chases noise, loud, urgent, and completely misdirected. They believe income, hustle, and long hours are the path to wealth. That belief quietly traps them. The truth is, harsher wealth doesn't come from working harder, it comes from owning better. And most people spend their lives avoiding ownership. You've been taught to measure your worth by how much you earn. That is the first distortion. Earning feels productive. It gives you feedback, validation, movement. But it is a narrow game. It keeps you inside a loop where effort and reward are tightly connected, almost like a leash. The more you pull, the more it pulls back. Ownership breaks that leash. But ownership requires a different identity. And this is where most people quietly fail. They don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they never leave the identity of an earner. They become efficient, reliable, even respected, but they remain dependent. And dependency, no matter how comfortable, is still dependency. Let me put it simply. There are two types of people in the economic world: those who run on a wheel and those who own the wheel. Most people spend decades perfecting their speed on the wheel. They optimize their resumes, negotiate salaries, chase promotions. It feels like progress. It looks like progress. But underneath, the structure never changes. They are still trading time for money, energy for survival. And time is a terrible currency to spend so casually, because time does not scale. If you double your effort, you do not double your life. You just exhaust it faster. This is the hidden conflict no one explains clearly. The public rule says work more, earn more. The real rule says own more, need less effort. And the gap between those two rules is where wealth is either built or quietly lost. Think of it like this. Imagine two men. One runs every day inside a perfectly engineered hamster wheel. Smooth, efficient, optimized. The other owns a piece of farmland. At first, the runner looks more productive. He is sweating, moving, achieving daily output. The farmer, on the other hand, seems slow. He plants, waits, observes. But time reveals the truth. The runner must continue forever. The moment he stops, everything stops. The farmer, however, begins to see compounding. The land produces season after season. His effort separates from his reward. That separation is the beginning of wealth. Most people never cross that line. They confuse activity with progress. They mistake motion for direction. And the system encourages it. It rewards visible effort, not invisible positioning. Here is a sentence that may unsettle you: your job is not your asset. In many cases, it is your most sophisticated liability. Not because work is bad, but because it consumes the one resource you cannot replenish: your time, while giving you just enough comfort to never question the structure. That is the trap, and traps do not feel like traps when you are inside them. They feel like stability. So the real question is not how hard you are working. It is what you are working toward. Are you building something that continues without you? Or are you reinforcing a system that collapses the moment you step away? Very few people ask this honestly, because asking it forces a confrontation with identity. It forces you to admit that what you have been optimizing may not be the game that matters. And that realization is uncomfortable. But it is also liberating, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how the world is structured. You see that the people who appear calm are often the ones who own assets. Their energy is not tied to every hour. Their decisions are not driven by urgency. They operate with patience because their systems are working in the background. Meanwhile, the crowd remains busy, always in motion, always reacting. This is where ordinary people lose the plot. They believe the answer is to run faster. But speed only deepens the dependency if the structure is wrong. The real move is not acceleration. It is repositioning. And repositioning begins with a simple shift in thought. Stop asking how you can earn more, and start asking what you can own. Because ownership changes the rules of the game. It moves you from effort to leverage, from reaction to control, from survival to strategy. And once that shift happens, everything else begins to reorganize around it. Now, Once you begin to see that ownership is the real game, the next question becomes more precise. What exactly should you own? Because not all assets are equal. Some demand your attention constantly. Others quietly produce, almost indifferent to your presence. And that distinction between noisy assets and silent ones is where most people make their second mistake. They chase assets that look impressive instead of assets that behave intelligently. The first asset that begins to change everything is what I call a cash-generating system. Not a job, not a one-time deal. A system. A system is something that produces value repeatedly without requiring your constant reinvention. It has structure, it has process, it has continuity. Most people never build one. They live in a cycle of effort-based income. Work, get paid. Stop and the flow stops. It is clean, predictable, and quietly limiting. A system, on the other hand, separates your effort from your reward over time. This is the principle of silent leverage. And silent leverage is very different from loud effort. Effort is visible. It feels noble. People praise it. Systems, however, are often invisible. They look unimpressive in the beginning. They require patience without applause. That is why so few people commit to them. Let me give you an image. Imagine two people who need water. One carries buckets from the river every single day. The other spends time building a well. The bucket carrier looks more productive at first. He moves constantly. He sweats. He delivers immediate results. The well builder, however, appears slow. He digs, adjusts, fails, tries again. There is no immediate reward, no daily validation. But once the well is built, everything changes. Water becomes accessible. Effort drops. Stability increases. The system replaces the struggle. This is the difference between income and a cash-generating system. One requires you forever. The other requires you until it works. Most people choose the bucket because it pays today. Very few are willing to build the well because it demands patience and uncertainty. And here is the uncomfortable truth. If you are always paid for your time, you are still carrying buckets, even if the buckets become heavier and more expensive. The goal is not to carry better buckets. The goal is to stop carrying them entirely. Now, what makes a system valuable is not just that it produces money. It is that it produces money with diminishing dependence on you. That is the real signal. If the system collapses the moment you step away, it is not a system. It is disguised labor. This is where clarity becomes rare, because many things in the modern world pretend to be systems. They use the language of leverage, but they still depend on constant attention. True systems have three quiet characteristics. They are repeatable, they are scalable, and they are increasingly independent of your direct input. Anything that does not move in that direction is still tied to you more than you think. This is where most people lose discipline. They start something, see slow progress, and abandon it. They return to effort because effort gives faster feedback. But faster feedback is not the same as better outcomes. In fact, it often traps you in short-term thinking. So the first asset requires a kind of maturity that is rarely discussed. It requires you to tolerate delayed reward without losing conviction. It requires you to build something that may not impress anyone for a while. And it requires you to trust that once the system stabilizes, it will begin to carry you, not emotionally, financially. This is the shift from pushing to positioning. You stop asking, how can I make more today? And start asking, what can I build that makes tomorrow easier? And once you build even one functioning system, your entire perception of effort changes. You begin to see that freedom is not found in intensity. It is found in structure. Now, once that foundation is in place, the second asset becomes not only logical, but inevitable, because systems generate cash, but equity generates wealth. And the difference between the two is not obvious until you experience it. Cash is immediate. It solves problems. It gives you options. But equity compounds. And compounding is where time begins to work in your favor instead of against you. The second asset, the one that separates the patient from the restless, is ownership in something scarce. Scarcity is critical Because abundance dilutes value. If anyone can access it, it rarely compounds in a meaningful way. But when you own a piece of something limited, something that grows, something that others need, you step into a different timeline. You stop operating on days and weeks. You begin operating on years. Let me give you a simple image. Imagine two individuals again. One rents a house in a city that is quietly expanding. The other owns a small piece of land in that same city. At first, there is no dramatic difference. Both have access. Both live their lives. But time begins to reveal the structure. As the city grows, demand increases. The land becomes more valuable, not because the owner worked harder, but because the environment evolved. The renter, however, experiences the opposite pressure. Costs rise, control decreases, one benefits from time. The other is taxed by it. This is the difference between participation and ownership. Most people participate in the economy. They work, spend, consume. Very few own parts of it. And ownership, when attached to scarcity and growth, behaves like gravity. It pulls value toward itself over time. But here is where psychology interferes again. Ownership feels slow. It does not give you daily excitement. It does not reward constant action. In fact, it often requires you to do nothing for extended periods. And doing nothing, for most people, feels like failure. They have been conditioned to equate activity with progress. So they interfere. They buy, sell, adjust, react. They turn a long-term advantage into short-term noise. This is where ordinary people lose the plot again. They cannot sit still long enough for compounding to reveal itself. But compounding does not reward movement. It rewards alignment and patience. This is what I call the discipline of stillness. It is the ability to hold a good position without needing to prove intelligence every week. It is the refusal to trade long-term gain for short-term stimulation. And it is rare, because it requires emotional control more than intellectual ability. You do not need to be brilliant to own equity, but you do need to resist the urge to constantly touch it. That is the hidden difficulty. Now, when you combine a cash-generating system with scarce equity, something subtle begins to happen. The system feeds your present. The equity builds your future. One gives you stability. The other gives you scale. And together, they begin to reduce your dependence on effort. This is the moment where the game starts to feel different. You are no longer reacting to life. You are positioning within it. And once you experience even a small version of this, your tolerance for purely effort-based income begins to disappear, because you realize something simple but powerful. Time does not reward those who are busy. It rewards those who are positioned. And very few people are willing to position themselves correctly, because it requires them to slow down, think clearly, and act with restraint. That combination is rare, but it is also where the real advantage lies. Now, the fourth asset is the one most people underestimate, ignore, or simply never build. It is not visible. It does not show up on a balance sheet. No one can take it from you, but most people give it away freely. It is your decision-making ability, not intelligence in the academic sense, not information, not opinions, judgment. The ability to see clearly when others are emotional. The ability to wait when others rush. The ability to say no when everything around you is designed to make you say yes. This is the internal asset that multiplies all external ones, because without it, even good assets become bad decisions. Think of it like this. Most people are handed maps their entire life. Instructions, advice, trends, expert opinions. They follow directions step by step, hoping to arrive somewhere meaningful. But the world changes too fast for maps. What you need is a compass. A compass does not tell you where to step. It tells you where north is. The rest depends on your judgment. Most people never build that compass. They outsource their thinking. They react to headlines, to market noise, to social pressure. And in doing so, they slowly lose control of their decisions. This is what I call the illusion of guidance. It feels safe to follow. It feels intelligent to stay informed, but constant input creates dependency, and dependency erodes clarity. The disciplined mind does the opposite. It filters, it subtracts, it protects its attention like a scarce resource, because it is. Here is a simple truth that most people resist. Every bad decision compounds faster than a good one. One emotional investment, one rushed partnership, one impulsive move, and suddenly, years of progress are diluted. This is why judgment is not optional. It is defensive architecture. It protects what you build, and more importantly, it tells you what to ignore. Very few people are willing to ignore opportunities. They are afraid of missing out. They believe more options equal more success. But in reality, more options often create more mistakes. The disciplined investor, whether in business or life, wins not by doing more, but by doing less with higher precision. This is the discipline of refusal, and it is rare, because saying no feels like loss in the moment. But over time, it becomes your greatest advantage. When you combine clear judgment with patience, something interesting happens. You begin to see through noise almost instantly. You recognize patterns. You stop reacting. And slowly, your decisions start to carry weight. Not because you make many of them, but because you make fewer, better ones. That is the third asset, invisible, quiet, but powerful beyond measure. Now, when all three assets come together, the structure of your life changes in a way that is difficult to reverse. You have systems producing income. You have equity compounding over time. And you have judgment protecting and directing both. This is the triangle most people never build. Instead, they operate in fragments. They earn without owning. They own without understanding. Or they think without acting. But when these three align, something stabilizes. It is not excitement, it is control. Think of it as a fortress. Each asset is a wall. Remove one and the structure weakens. Remove two, and you are exposed. But with all three in place, pressure from the outside begins to matter less. You are no longer dependent on constant activity. You are no longer vulnerable to every shift in the environment. You become selective, and selectivity is a form of power most people never experience. But here is the final tension. Almost everyone will hear these ideas. Very few will apply them, because the cost is not money. The cost is patience. The cost is restraint. The cost is giving up the need to look busy, to feel productive, to chase validation. And that cost feels invisible, but it is heavy. So people return to what is comfortable. They return to motion. They return to noise. And they wonder why nothing changes. If you followed this far, then you already feel the difference. You can sense that the game is not about doing more. It is about structuring your life differently. So here is where it becomes real. Not tomorrow, not someday now. I want you to make a simple decision, not a dramatic one, a precise one. In the comments, write one thing you will stop chasing from today forward. Not what you will do, what you will refuse. Because your future is not built only on what you pursue. It is protected by what you eliminate. Most people will hesitate. They will think about it, delay it, ignore it. But a few will write something real. And those few will begin to change direction. Because wealth is not built by those who know. It is built by those who decide, and then quietly align their life around that decision. And once that alignment begins, the noise fades, the pressure drops, and the game becomes clear, simple, but not easy, and never crowded.